Now I'd like to, enormous pleasure, introduce Miranda Wolpert, CYP IAPT Informatics Lead, to present on what the outcomes data tell us so far. Miranda, as you know, has been absolutely at the cliff face of data gathering over years on really an exceptionally difficult area, I think, to gather data in. Now, as the Minister has said, and I will say later on, we're in an NHS that is relentlessly focused on outcomes and demonstrating improvement for our young clients. So we can't do it without what you're doing. As Miranda will tell you, we can't do it without the real-time and meaningful monitoring. And actually, the work you're doing at this moment in time puts us way ahead of the game. So, Miranda, over to you.
Thanks. True to the spirit of outcome monitoring, I thought I'd do a very dangerous thing to start with. Can I check, how many of you are frontline practitioners? Could you put your hand up? Great. For those, and how many of you, keep your hand up for a second. How many of those of you who are frontline practitioners are currently part of Child IAPT services? Keep your hand up if you're part of Child IAPT service. Right. Now here's a dangerous question. Keep your hand up if you feel broadly positive about outcome monitoring use within children's IAPT services from your experience. Just seeing how many hands go down. Perhaps just so I can check. Okay, put your hands down. If you were not broadly positive and are part of a child IAPT service, please bravely put your hand up. Great, thank you. You will be speaking for more than others. I suppose I want to encourage people. I'm going to try and end on time so there's time for some questions, but also to encourage, in the spirit of feedback, if people are not feeling comfortable. I know that sometimes this can be a bit sort of evangelizing up here, and I really believe in what we're doing. I believe in everything that's been said up to now, and I feel very proud to be part of this collaboration, but I know it's not easy, and we are learning together. So I do want to hear and have chance for people's voices to be heard who may be feeling more uncertain, feeling this may not be the right way, wanting to discuss how we can adopt and adapt things. So I just want to have space for that a bit. So I'm here primarily with my hat as National Informatics Lead for CYP IAPT, and as Chair of the Outcomes and Evaluation Group. But I also chair the CAMS Outcomes Research Consortium, which jointly with the Evidence-Based Practice Unit and with our IT partners, MegaNexus, are responsible for collating and collecting the data. So I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. I got very jealous of all Peter's whizzy graphics, and if I'm invited back next year, I'm definitely going to be competing on that. Mine's much lower key. Really, this is a major group effort, and I'm very aware of all the people in the Outcomes Evaluation Group, all the people involved in collating the data, and I particularly wanted to mention the data managers. I don't know whether any are here today. Could you put up your hand? A couple. So you're represented, please, if you can take back thanks to those when we meet in data managers groups. They're often a group that don't get adequate thanks, I think. They're people that have to endlessly collect in information and liaise between central organisations and busy clinicians, and it can be a bit of a thankless task, but it's an absolutely crucial task. Also, I suppose I do want to thank the leadership of both Catherine and Peter, who really do keep the whole show on the road. When I was thinking about presenting findings from outcomes data, I started thinking about the sort of basic principles of what we're actually doing here. And I think from the start we were set, in some ways, a very difficult task, which is to do two things at the same time. And those of you who've heard me speak before will have seen me do the balancing act before. The balance is between, on the one hand, wanting outcomes measures and feedback from clients that we work with to inform our practice, to actually help us in conversations, to help us meet the goals of the young people we're working with. And for that, we need feedback. Now, whether it's the feedback in the form of written measurement or in other ways is still debatable. But one way of doing that is definitely using questionnaires, and the sort of questionnaires we're piloting at the moment. On the other hand, however, we need information for evaluation. We need information to be able to give ammunition to Norman Lamb, who is a real ally in this, to try and help him argue for people for more money for the programme, say, look, they're doing good work, they deserve more money. And when they're divvying up the money between cancer, mental health, child mental health, we have some evidence to say, actually, we have an impact. Now, trying to do those things at the same time, with the same measures, is not completely easy. And there are real compromises to be made. I was really struck in the film that Peter showed earlier by the young people talking about, I'm just a diagnosis, I'm being treated in a judgmental way. There is a real danger that the measures used improperly could actually make things worse. They could be part of feeling judged. They could be part of being, you're just a diagnosis. They could be part of being categorised and boxed away. On the other hand, if we say, well, those measures themselves inherently stigmatised, inherently categorised, inherently boxed, then we have no way of actually providing information that can help us evaluate, help us be transparent, help us keep ourselves to account. So trying to do both those things at the same time does inevitably create compromises in the sort of measures we can use and the way we can use them. And some of the measures that we're trialling at the moment speak more to the evaluation, some speak more to practice, but we've tried at base to make them all useful, primarily for practice, but with implications for evaluation. The graph on the left around evaluation is a funnel plot. And that's the way that we would like to encourage presentation of all outcome data going forward. What it does is it shows service outcomes. Each of those blobs is a service or is a team, or could be an individual practitioner. In this particular graph, it's teams, child mental health teams. And what it shows is their outcomes compared to each other and whether they fall within a range. So if you look in the middle of that plot, the sort of broad mass of dots, that shows you that most of the services are getting similar sorts of outcomes. The ones we're interested in are the ones that fall way outside on either side. So the ones that are above the line are doing much better in terms of those outcome measures, and those below the line are doing worse. The reason for wanting to share that with you and to sort of explain direction of travel is what we don't want is that mass of dots in the middle spending lots of time saying, why am I different from the one next to me? Because the chances are that may just be random fluctuation. And what we don't want is you spending your precious time trying to look for differences where they don't exist. What we do want is to identify if there are real areas of good practice or real areas where people are being challenged and need to be challenged. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that particular? So I guess before we go on to just talk a bit more about how we're doing that, how we're finding it, I guess the thing to say is that all the measurements, all the outcome measures we've got at the moment are flawed. And I make no apology for that, because all the measures out there at the moment are flawed. And I think if we'd waited for a perfect measure, we would still be waiting. But what it does mean is you've got to remember when you're using these measures, it's like trying to measure someone's height, but with a very shaky hand. Some of the measures, the hand is a bit shaky like this, and some of it's like this. So when you as practitioners are trying to say, is this person feeling better or worse than they were yesterday or the last time I saw them, you're comparing this with this. So you're having to make judgments about what does this mean? What does this mean individually for the person in front of me in practice? And then nationally, we have to make judgments about what does this mean in terms of comparisons across services. So it is complicated. And of course, the practice and evaluation come together in terms of trying to bring together ways of actually looking at those data so that we can meaningfully map trajectories of change for individual young people, as well as considering them for services and teams. So this is a graph that doesn't come from CYP IAPT. It comes from, but does come from one of the measures that is being used within CYP IAPT, the outcomes evaluation scale developed in the States by Scott Miller and Barry Duncan. And the reason I put it up is really to show you the way that in the end both the practice needs and the evaluation needs do come together. In that what we ideally want is, if you see there the score on this particular measure at 25 is the clinical cutoff, what this is showing is a particular young person's journey through their treatment. And as they go through their treatment, their scores bounce around a bit. Broadly on this measure, higher is better. So they start off feeling really very low and are getting slowly better, but are not actually feeling within the norm for people that do not have problems. The other lines mark the percentiles. They mark where you would expect the person to be who had started off feeling that low. One of the things we're drawing on for this work is the work of Michael Lambert and Len Bickman in the States, who really pioneered ways of trajectory mapping so that we as clinicians can start to get information back so we can know when people are in danger of dropping out or not being helped by our treatment. And what we know from some of their research is that on the whole, as individuals, we are worse at it than statistical models. That these models can actually help us help the young people we work with. That these facts and figures aren't just data to go into a black hole or to go off to national government. They're actually data that may actually help us in our clinical work. The challenge for us is how to do that in a way that doesn't end up being tick boxing, bureaucratic or judgmental. So in terms of our findings so far, in terms of outcomes for practice, what we've developed is a model really of thinking about the different stages of the care pathway that young people come through. And I want to acknowledge particularly Duncan Law and others' work here, who've really worked with me and others on trying to think through how this links with our clinical practice. So we have a range of measures that we've developed and you've developed as a community, which look at answering what we conceive of as 6 key questions that we might want to ask as people come to our services. The first, and we've sort of put it for neatness into 2s, but they don't necessarily completely fit into those categories. So the first set of questions is really those questions we might have in our minds when we first see someone, first contact, which is really trying to understand what's the problem, what's at issue here. And then the second question is what do you want to change? What's the goal of our treatment? Now those 2 things may be very interlinked, but they may also be quite separate. And I think part of the task of IAPT and part of the task of outcome use in IAPT is to try and hold us to account for being very transparent with the young people and families we're working with about what it is they want to achieve and how will we know when we've achieved it. One of the feedback we've had from young people is that they can come to services, they have conversations, they come to meetings, they're none the wiser as to why they're there or what they're doing or what those conversations are about. Part of this is being clear so that we're all clear with each other, what are we trying to do, and perhaps even more controversially, what can we not do? What can we not help with? The second set of questions, which really is part of the ongoing work when you're working in partnership, and for those going to Anne and Steve's Kappa workshop, this would fit with the Kappa models, are really about, start with thinking about how are we getting on? How are we getting on together? How is our relationship going? We know that the relationship between a professional and the young people and families they're trying to work with is a crucial part of the therapeutic relationship, is a crucial part of achieving good outcomes. How are we getting on together, in fact, should be in the assessment and choice element of the care pathway as well, but for neatness we put it into the partnership working. And then, how are things going? In relation to the goals we set, in relation to what we wanted to achieve, how do we hold ourselves to account to know whether things are getting better? How do we know if things are going off track? And that's where the outcome measures that we are trialling and trying out are so crucial to help us think about what's going on for this person. And then at review and close, have we done as much as we can? Have we done as much as we need to? And how has this experience been generally? Now, the reason for differentiating how this experience has been generally from how we're getting on together is because how we're getting on together is used largely for practice. We want to encourage people to be able to tell us uncomfortable things. We want to encourage people to be able to say to us, I didn't understand what you just said. I don't like the way we're working. I don't feel I'm getting better. And we don't want services to be penalised for that. So we don't want those data ever to be held against services to say, people said negative things about you, because we want to encourage people to say negative things. We want to encourage clinicians to feel comfortable to ask people to say negative things. On the other hand, by the time you come to the end of treatment, by the time people are reflecting on their experience, we want people to pass the friends and families test. We want people to be able to say, yes, this was a service that I feel was good. This really helped me. This is something I could recommend to others. So at that point, it is appropriate to use those data to look at issues around how services compare to each other, how we can improve services. I guess the other thing to say in terms of the measurement, in terms of our learning, and to be really upfront, and I know we're 3 years into the programme, but we're 3 years into what is an enormous learning curve for all of us. And you are all with us pioneers in how to do this and how to do this right. Most of the normed measures that we're using at the moment are normed in America. Colleague David Trickey in particular is leading on trying to make sure that we get norms that are UK-based and that the advice we give is absolutely accurate for our populations. We are still in the process of learning how best to introduce these measures at each stage in this care pathway, how to talk about them with young people, how to reflect on them in supervision. And I know that Emma Morris and Duncan Law are respectively leading workshops that I would commend to you on working particularly with BME groups and using the measures in supervision. So we are learning, and one of the excitements for me as I go around the country and talk with people doing these is how much learning we've already got. Some of the rules that we're developing through that learning is it needs to be minimal burden. That we need to find ways of doing this that absolutely fit with clinical practice. If these are imposed from above, if these measures are imposed from above as additional add-ons, as bureaucratic burdens, as form filling, they will not work. And for those who are interested, I've just published an article recently on the potential harm of patient-reported outcomes, because I really do believe, and it certainly keeps me awake at night, there are a million ways of introducing these measures in ways that could actually be harmful and unhelpful. It's our job as a community to find ways of actually integrating them in ways that can be helpful. We have some quite basic rules in relation to this, and one of them is, if you do not feel that the measures are useful to the young people in front of you, if you feel that they may do more harm than good, then do not give out the measures. In the end, it is your clinical judgment that must take precedence. If you feel these measures are unhelpful or harmful, do not use them. It is not good enough to say, I've been told I have to. So I know that I'm going to be talking about the 90% target in a minute, and I know there's a balance between practice and evaluation. And the reason we set the 90% target is because we believe, from all the evidence we have to date, that 90% of the time, the forms are the range of forms that you can select from, one of them will be more useful than harmful to the young people and the families you're working with. But if sitting in front of you is someone in huge distress, or someone who is saying, I don't want to fill in a form, or someone where for whatever reason you feel this is not right, then do not do it. The forms themselves do not trump your clinical judgment, they do not trump the needs of the people in front of you. What we know from young people is that they are often more positive about the experience of forms and outcome measurement than clinicians, if done right. So we know there is a shared concern from practitioners and young people that given wrong, given in a way that is like a sort of research project, these forms are unhelpful. But in terms of a collaborative relationship, in terms of an agreement about how are things going, where there is genuine curiosity about how are you progressing, how can I help you, what do we need to do next, then they can actually be a force for good. And I know there's going to be a video after I've spoken today more about that. We've got a fantastic resource, and I've just realised there's an eye missing in my eye fantastic resource led by GIFT, which really supports young people thinking about how to use these measures. And the advice really is, use these measures in a collaborative model. So moving to the other end of the spectrum then, to the evaluation. As you'll be well aware, you collecting the outcome information, it gets extracted from your local data system and gets uploaded centrally once every quarter. We know at the moment this is not a non-burdensome task. We know how much work is involved. I wish there was a magic way of getting the information direct into the ether without it having to be inputted. The advent of iPads and technology that allows people to directly enter information will ease things hugely. It will make a huge difference. But there is still work on these systems. What I would say is we are really in advance of many areas in being able to do this. So although it's a lot of work, we hope that we feel it's worth it, and we hope that over time the systems will become more streamlined. And I'm happy to take questions on that, as I suspect there will be. In terms of the evaluation rules, the dreaded 90% target. So the target is that we want to have outcome data on 90% of clients that you see. And this is so that Norman Lamb and others can use this to really think about our services having the impact we would like, and we can look to see, are there some services that can learn from other services in any way? You can use any outcome measure, any patient-reported outcome measure which has clinical norms. That's our only criteria from the Child Act data set. You have to use the same measure from the same perspective a second time. We are recommending you use the measures every time you see a young person, because that's our understanding from the literature that will make the most difference in practice to help you spot where things are going off track and when you can help people more. It will also be the way that we will make sure we have data at time 2. We also crucially want information about whether that young person is in employment, education and training, and any issues with that, to ensure that we have the sort of data and information that will actually help with the join-up also with schools and with DFE. Currently, the sort of measures that can be used for patient-reported outcomes include things like the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, the revised Child Anxiety and Depression Scale, the Child Outcome Rating Scales, the Impact of Events Scale, which is for post-traumatic stress disorder, and 2 scales for behavioural difficulties, one for children, one for parents. And there are additional measures being included now in version 3 of the dataset. In terms of what we know now, you have in your packs the annual report, which is our first report on data collected by you from last year. The next report will be out 2014, which will be for this year's data. These data relate largely to the work of 99 trainees, who are obviously not trainees in the sense that they're not experienced CAMHS clinicians, but trainees in the sense that they're training in Child IAPT evidence-based approaches. From those 99 trainees, we know that they started seeing just under 1,500 cases, of which 255 they'd finished working with by the time we did the annual report. The mean age was around 12, the kids they were seeing, with peaks at around 8 and around 15. Majority were female, and the vast majority for whom we had information were white British. One of the pleas that I know colleagues from the Outcomes and Evaluation Group will not forgive me if I don't mention is, if you do not fill in ethnicity data, if we do not have that information, the danger is that it will look like, and it may be true, that we are only seeing white British clients. So we need to know ethnicity information to know, are we accessing those populations that we should be accessing? A large percentage of cases were seen only once. This is something we're seeing not just in Child IAPT data, but in other data sets. And it's worth saying here that one of the synchronicities here is the Child IAPT data set and the Child IAPT approach is being used as the cornerstone for the Payment by Results project in CAMHS, allowing us to reduce burden on systems and also ensure that we share learning. In terms of the sorts of problems that were seen, the most common, as you can see, were depression, low mood, family relationship difficulties, a range of anxieties and behaviour difficulties. Not surprising, given that these were trainees working primarily in parent training and in CBT. The sort of interventions offered, again, is what we'd expect, given these were trainees being trained specifically in these approaches. It'll be very interesting to see the data coming in next year when the 2,500 clinicians that Peter spoke of will be sending in data from the full range of cases across CAMHS. From the trainees, we have fantastic response rates in terms of outcomes data. So we've got 85% of those closed cases have symptom-specific outcome measures. 88% of them have outcome measures that are either symptom-specific or general functioning. Much smaller numbers have information about education, employment and training, but that was partly because at that stage it was a separate form to collect that information. We've now rationalised that into the current view form, and we're already seeing better returns from previous quarters. We have to go with some caution here in terms of emerging outcomes because the numbers are still so small. But for panic, for obsessional compulsive disorder, for separation anxiety, generalised anxiety, general well-being, parent-rated depression and achievement of goals, we saw a significant improvement on average for those young people seen within services for whom we have data. There was no significant improvement on average for young people's rating of depression. Now, whether that will hold up over time when we have larger data sets or not, I don't know. It's one of the things we'll be looking at. We'll also be looking at different ways of analysing the data in terms of reliable change, in terms of recovery rates, and in terms of effect sizes. In terms of looking to the future, I've already mentioned that you have this bulletin which summarises the findings to date in your pack. And we are shortly about to launch the new practice guidance which follows on from the co-op document that Duncan and others led last year, and which has numerous contributors. Many of you in this room will have contributed massively to this document, and we're linking in very closely with MindEd to make sure that there is synchronicity again in terms of advice. We really want to hear your feedback. We really want to have your views on how you're finding using the measures, both for practice and for evaluation. Please let us know. And at this point, I'll take any questions. Oh, sorry, one last thing. All the measures, all the new measures are on the Cork website now. You don't have to be a Cork member to go on there. All the measures are on there. The advice will also be on there and on the Child Diet website. Thank you.
Miranda, thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions. 2 questions.
Miranda, I'm from Bedford, Cams. We went out and bought some lovely iPads, which we love, but not all these measures actually go on that iPad, do they? There's some work to be done on that, and I just wondered if there's a time frame for that.
Well, all the measures are available on the iPad. The only one that I'm aware of that there may be some complexities about is if you want to use the SDQ direct with young people, you need to there's a license fee for using it in the form that they can use direct, but all the others should be available.
So you could just clarify that they're actually those the software for that is freely available, is it?
Yes.
For the trusts. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Miranda. I'm Rabia Malik from the Marlborough Family Service.
Hi.
I really appreciate, your dilemma about outcome measures in terms of evaluation and also performance, and I also appreciate you've got a range of measures that clinicians can use. But for me, there are real ethical dilemmas because I feel the pressure more than ever organisationally to be pushed towards making diagnoses. And although short-term for clients that can be a relief, the long-term effects of making diagnoses for young people that might limit their becoming really concerns me. And with all the kind of push to make changes rapidly, I don't know if there's enough consideration of the ethical effects of some of what we're doing.
There's nothing inherent in the measures that we're suggesting that requires you to make a diagnosis. No. So just, I think there has, I would, perhaps I could give a slightly more honest answer to that, to say, I think there's been real debate in the outcomes and evaluation group and wider about the positives and negatives of the different measures. And they do have different strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, something like the RCADs, does give a breadth of understanding of the sorts of difficulties that we may otherwise miss. So we know there is a lot of young people with anxiety out there who we miss in services currently. Now, whether you believe in a diagnosis of anxiety or not, what we hear back from young people who've had experience of using something like the RCADs is that they say things like, how did you know? This is the first time anyone's asked me these questions. It's the first time I felt able to talk about these sort of issues. Now, if you don't feel that's right for your client group, or you don't feel that's the right measure to use, then we need to think about other measures. And I guess, to be clear, we are in the process of consulting always. We'll review again spring 2014. If current measures are not fit for purpose, we can jettison them and bring in other measures, but we do need to do that in a considered and careful way. We've written all the materials and all the guidance to be very clear that by giving a score on the RCAS doesn't necessarily give you a diagnosis, but if you do believe in diagnosis and want to use it as part of that decision making, it can be used in that way. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I just think it needs to kind of filter down, because I don't know if there's enough discussion where clinicians really feel they can collaborate in choosing the measures they want. I think measures that help clients feel understood as well as clinicians feel that understanding their clients are really useful. But I don't know if the symptom-based ones and what I've experienced is the over-emphasis on those is always.
I think there's a real issue here about the interpretation of this at the trust level. And I would say that's true both for the measures and for data upload and for a whole range of things. And it's one of the things we need to be clear about as a community. Because what I hear again and again, people say to me, my trusts say I have to use measure X with everyone. And that's completely antithetical to the approach that we've tried to produce. What we've tried to do is say, here is a range, you choose what's right using your clinical judgment.
I think that's a really important point to establish, isn't it? That actually the ones that are more appropriate are the ones that should be used rather than every single one.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Miranda.